show. Yeah.
Okay, so far so good. And we have everybody. Excellent. All right, let's get this underway. I'm just going to do a few quick announcements as the MC. My name's Justin. I'm one of the volunteers with the All Volunteer Startup Boston team, one of the organizers of the event. I'm just going to give a few quick housekeeping items and then hand it off to our moderator and panelists here. For those attending, the first thing I'm going to mention is the actual session that you're in, because I know there are a few sessions that go on at the same time. This one is a market mindset using market research to generate opportunities. There's another session going on at the same time. If you were in the wrong session, if you want to float around, if you want to plan your adventure ahead for the afternoon, you can click agenda at the top and you'll see all the sessions going on at the same time and the ones that are yet to come. So really helpful. The other thing, we love questions. That's why we're doing this. The panelists are here to answer your questions. So if you have any questions, at the top right, you'll see a Q&A tab, not to be confused with the chat tab. We'd love for you to use both. Chat, you can talk amongst each other, but if you do have a question for the panelists, Q&A tab is just the easiest. It allows us to organize and make sure that those questions get in front of the panelists to be answered. Last thing, we're doing a contest right now. So if you hear any quotes that you really, really love from the panelists here today, put that quote out on social media with the hashtag SBW2021, SBW for Startup Boston Week. SBW 2021. You'll automatically be entered to win one of 5 $100 gift cards to a local Black-owned Boston business. So a great way of showing your support for the panelists here and what they have to teach, and also a great way to support the local community. With that, you've survived my spiel. I'm going to hand it off to our moderator, Zan Ali. Take it from here, Zan.
Thank you, Justin. Good morning, everyone, and welcome to Startup Boston. I'm excited for today's session, which is titled A Market Mindset, Using Market Research to Generate Opportunities. Whether you're a marketer, a founder, an analyst, or anything in between, it's likely that market research is critical to your role and critical to the success of your business. Today, we're going to deep dive into just that. Chat about what market research actually is, how it works, and then get some lessons from the trenches from our all-star cast of panelists. So, without any further ado, let's get into it. First, let me briefly introduce our panelists, Adrian Mendoza, Naira Musallam, and Tina Adolfson. Adrian Mendoza is the founder and general partner of Mendoza Ventures. After having 2 VC-funded startups in Boston, Adrian started Mendoza to address the funding gap at the pre-seed investment stage for underrepresented founders. He launched his firm in 2016, focused on investments in artificial intelligence, fintech, and cyber. Mendoza is a minority and woman-led, as well as the first VC firm on the East Coast founded by a Latino. The firm is currently raising its 3rd fund, and its first fund is in the top quartile of seed stage funds. Welcome, Adrian. Naira is the co-founder and co-CEO of SiteX, an insight platform that enables users to accelerate their curiosity via getting deeper and faster understanding of their consumers and audiences. SiteX is utilized by iconic brands, agencies, early-stage startups, and VCs to drive better decision-making. Prior to founding SiteX, Naira completed her doctorate at Columbia University and spent several years teaching research and statistics at both Columbia and NYU. She regularly consulted Fortune 500 across industries and is a regular speaker on unlocking the potential of data. Her most enjoyable hobby is high-altitude mountain climbing. Very cool. Welcome, Naira.
Thank you.
And finally, and last but not least, Tina. Tina Adolfson is VP of Marketing and Data Innovation Lead at Survey.com, a retail tech company helping brands win in brick and mortar stores. She also advises CPG growth companies on strategy and business development. Her background includes launching and scaling consumer goods and luxury lifestyle products on top of brands like Procter & Gamble, Gillette, and Ralph Lauren. Thank you all for being here. And let's get right into it. So I have a number of questions prepared. Audience, feel free to add stuff to the Q&A and we'll try to address those along the way. The first one, I guess I'll direct it slightly more broadly to anyone who wants to answer, is how would you more narrowly define market research? In other words, what are the various components of market research? For example, market sizing, segmentation, competitive intelligence. I'll toss it out for a quick definition first.
So the practical definition, the way that I look at it, is there's the big broad thing, which is the market, right? Do you understand the size of the market? Do you understand how it's split? What are the things that combine the different players of your market? That includes your buyers, that includes your competitors, it includes your vendors. So you need to kind of understand your market and where you add value in that chain. It then has to do a lot with market segmentation, because at the end of the day, when you're launching a company, while you might have partners and you might have, the investors, et cetera, you still need to, at the end of the day, generate revenue. Not that every company has done that, but you do need to generate revenue, and that is identifying who are the customers, who are the most likely customers for you, and who are the ones that you can add value to and find the most cost-effective way. And finally, there is that competitive intelligence, which is not only what are your potential buyers searching for and needing so that you can identify gaps in your market, but also what are your competitors doing and addressing, because they might have seen a path that you have not, and you might want to stay separate from that, or you might want to incorporate some of that into what you have. You should at least speak to it so that your buyers know what they are and are not buying when they're buying from you.
Thanks, Tina. Adrian, Naira, any additional kind of thoughts on the definition of market sizing?
Yeah, I'm happy to go. I mean, for us, when we look at market sizing, we have to look at what is the total addressable market. How much, if you have a product, a service, what is actually your, who are you going to sell to? And so I think the danger of what we see a lot especially in early stage founders is we're going to sell to everyone and the market is huge. And it's like, no, you're not going to sell to everyone. You're going to sell to a sub-segment of that market. And so the understanding of who that will be, and also understanding the economics of that. You'll hear us talk about a top-down and a bottom-up approach, like, start, with the global scale of the market, and then bring it down to something that is sizable, that that you can buy, that you could buy, that you can consume, that you can sell to, taking a chunk of that. And then the bottom up is literally building the economics on the business of the price point, the consumer, what that would look like, and then trying to find that number. And so for us, when we look at sort of market intelligence, it really comes down to, it's not just about understanding the market in general, it's understanding the customer themselves. What do the customers want to buy? Are they buying? Who are they? And really having a user persona around who that is, so that, at the early stage, we understand exactly who that buyer looks like, what are the behaviors, what are their patterns from, because that is also the beginning of a go-to-market strategy.
Yeah. And I'll just add to what Tina and Adrian said, which I think they articulated it very nicely, and say, fundamentally, it is a learning tool. It's a learning tool so entrepreneurs can validate their hypothesis, understand better their consumers, test hypotheses, explore opportunities. And if you were to take a look at the best of the best of companies, they're always in the mindset of learning. And so if you want to learn, if you want to iterate, if you want to execute and go through that cycle, whether you're a person who's thinking about an idea, or you're a seed stage, or series A, B, or C, or D, or publicly traded company, learning and iterating is always key. And that's how I view market research.
Terrific. And you started to briefly allude to this, and so I'll throw this to the whole panel, but maybe to you, Adrian, as well, given your perch of venture capital. Like, what is the purpose and importance of market research at the earliest stage? Like, outside of putting big numbers in a pitch deck, like why do startups need market research, and tactically, like what are they really hoping to accomplish from this exercise?
Yeah, I think that the biggest and most important thing is to not be a solution looking for a problem. And that's something we see with a lot of founders in the early stage. They want to go out and build things. They want to sort of build product. They want to build, spend millions of dollars and raise money towards that without someone who's actually buying it. And so, perfect example, I was being pitched yesterday by a company, and they had done a bunch of user interviews. And they said, well, great, we know what the market, so what we're going to do is we're going to start building product, and we're going to raise $1.5 million and just start building all the product. And I said, wait, you need to stop. And they said, what? You need to get these customers who have told you that they have given you advice, take it to the next step of will they pay, and actually get them to pay, and then come back and talk to them about what do they, now that they've paid, what do they actually want? Because the really important piece of it is understanding what they tell you is what they want, and what they actually want after they've paid and actually have taken out their credit card and literally paid for something. And for a B2C company, it's different. They might lose $5, $10, $15. But when you're talking to an enterprise product that is, a $100,000 to $600,000 license, and you haven't figured out what the customer actually means and what the customer actually wants, is really critical, because we've seen a good amount of companies spend $10 to $12 million and not building product and not actually define out that there's a buying customer for this. And I think that's the critical part about this entire thing, is how do you move it along to understand who they are and just close that gap between, what they say they want and what they actually do want.
Great. That makes a lot of sense. All right. So it sounds like we've established that market research is definitionally what it is, and that it's kind of a critically important function for a company of any size and any stage to kind of like maximize this learning that Naira was talking about. I'm curious, and Naira, I'll direct this one at you. How costly is this process, right? Like, how can a startup get the best ROI when it comes to market research? I imagine there's very expensive ways to do it and also some pretty cheap ways to do it.
Yeah, I think there is some misconception, especially with those who are not as experienced in doing market research, that it's going to cost you tens of thousands of dollars to do. And once you get perhaps to become more established company, then that's the time to do it. But like, the truth is, it's been a really exciting time for tech in market research, because what used to historically cost tens of thousands of dollars, nowadays you can run it in really fraction of the cost, because of all of the automation that took place and democratizing what I call market research. Now, it all depends in terms of how you get the most out of it. It really depends on what you put in it, right? And so we always, with Cytex, we work with the 1 person and the 100 consumer insight person company. And it really doesn't matter who is the user. We always communicate, try to figure out the why, who, what, and how. And by that, if you know why you're doing research, and believe it or not, it's actually not that sometimes it's straightforward in terms of which hypothesis you're looking to validate. So why are you doing it? Is it around price point? Is it around figuring out the segments? Is it around the combination of the features that are most important? And so being very clear on the why is very critical. And then, of course, the who, in terms of who's your ideal clients, like who are you looking to engage, who would be the users, and as they always say, there is an art and science to the what, in terms of what are you asking them, how are you asking them, like the questions, and then the methodologies that you're following. And so once you get all of that right, then what you could do, it doesn't have to be quant research. You can do qualitative research, or you can do a combination of quantitative and qualitative, but there is no need to start with 10,000 consumers. If you're an early stage startup, 20, 50, 100 will be just fine. And you can learn tons from that. And so, and I think Adrian alluded to that especially for early stage, like the recent CB Insight, I was like looking at in terms of like why even like startup fails, you have 35% of them where basically there is no need for the product, 20% of them that get out-competed, 19% of them a flawed business model, and 15% of them it's like pricing issues. Like that accounts for about 89% of failure. So when you take all of that, whether you're seed to A to publicly traded, and you're able to mitigate that through insight, and like the ROI and the benefit of that can be truly massive to a startup. You just need to do it right up front and realize that you have to iterate all the time and continue and learn. Yeah.
Very helpful. Thank you, Naira. Yeah, it sounds like it's an activity that no one is too early to start engaging in, and could potentially save a lot of time, energy, and effort down the road when you inevitably realize that no one wants to buy what you're selling. And okay, Tina, you've been in the trenches with a lot of companies of different sizes, and maybe you could kind of chat a little bit about what are the best strategies. Naira started talking about different components around pricing and customer segmentation. What are the best strategies for collecting this market research, and especially gauging kind of a company's potential to capture a portion of the market that they're chasing? And maybe while you're chatting about it, you can give some examples from different industries you've seen.
I'd be happy to. So first of all, to build on Naira's point, definitely be clear on why you're doing the research and what it will impact. So understanding if you're capturing the information to better create your product or better sell your product is incredibly different, and it will really impact your ROI. So a couple of things that will make it easy is layer on market research the things that you are already doing. So do your customer onboarding and have other people listening in to what your customer is experiencing as they're doing that. So allow an engineer to listen as your customer success person is doing the onboarding with the client and hear those questions and hear those concerns. Second, when someone is giving you input on your product, right? Take it differently depending on what it is. And this is all in that qualitative part, which is if they're giving you input on, they're complaining about what you're selling and you want to be selling that, listen carefully because you want to improve that. If they're complaining because they gave you, as Adrian said, they gave you the money and now they actually want this also and they assumed it in the buying process, listen to that because that might be a gap or an opportunity that you might want to address or you might not. And third, listen to what they say. If it's something you don't want to deal with, make sure that that gets fed back into how you communicate who you are so that you end up being differentiated. So depending on what they're complaining about and how you figure out that link to your product, that will apply to either product marketing or the sales process. Finally,
go ahead.
Going back into sorry. Wasn't that it? So splitting it up into consumer products versus B2B. When you're doing consumer products, you really want to know what that shopper is doing. You really want to know what the retailer is doing as well. So a lot of founders start with that friends and family and the farmers market. And that is fantastic for taste, flavor, but it doesn't really give you great input on packaging. So then you want to stick it into something that has shelf stores, put it into a couple of bodegas, get that research, get that feedback, and then layer that request for market research data into your merchandising question. So one of the reasons why Survey grew and grew so quickly is they gave away the data as proof of really great service. And the data ended up becoming, you bought the service and the data together. It helped the ROI. It drove data, and it drove insights and information. And it also then became information that you could use with your retailers to sell further, with your investors to prove how you were doing, where you were. And since we have a huge food, bev network in the greater Boston area, we have, BevNet and Nosh are structured out of Watertown. Branch Food is here. Definitely want to shout out to all the foodies that are making all the great snacks. And I think we've all eaten quite a few during COVID for that. If you're B2B, you have amazing things. And again, shout out to the Boston startups that have grown and become big. So HubSpot will let you know what technologies does that company use. So if you're a B2B and you need them to be, your customer to be on a specific type of technology for you to even be able to sell to them, HubSpot gives a lot of that information to you for free. If it's sizing, revenue sizing, or number of employees, they give it to you for free just for like using the rest of your product. Cabinet M, which is like your file cabinet for your marketing tools, is great if you're in the marketing B2B SaaS kind of services. There's over 4,000 to 8,000, 4,000 that have cataloged and claimed their account, and there's like another 10,000 different marketing martech companies that are out there, so that you can figure out what your marketing tech school is for. It's meant for you to streamline your operations, but it works incredibly well to do the market research. So layer on your market research tactics, and then learn from that. And then adding to the value of like, where do you get the ROI? If you do an incredible job of segmenting who you're going after and how you are targeting it, it allows you to hire a much younger, less experienced, but still eager to learn and eager to deliver workforce to help you. So you don't have to always go for that talented sales executive. You can have a couple of talented sales executives and layer on a BDR team of, some of the best and the brightest in the young talent pool that we have in Boston.
Thank you, Tina. Adrian, did you want to add something to
I think Tina brings two good points. And the first point that I think I wanted to sort of kind of as a lesson learned to everyone. And she referenced people complaining when they're giving out, especially more in sort of the one-on-one user experience feedback. One of the things that's really important when dealing with the collection of data, especially for this type of customer success, one-on-one user experience research that then sort of will be collected into market research, is to be wary of the outliers. Because sometimes when you do get people complaining, they might not be complaining because of the product. They might be complaining because they had a bad day, because they dropped a cup of coffee on themselves that morning. And so the important is that you're not taking a specific snapshot. You're getting enough statistical significance that you're starting to see the outliers come out, so that, the fear, what we see with a lot of early stage, as you're building a company, is that they glom onto one piece of feedback without revalidating it over and over again. And so when Tina talks about taking that feedback and then overlaying other data on top, it's critical to pull out what is literally the outliers between all of it. And the other thing to also, when you look at even some forms of market data, to take even some of those with a grain of salt. Things like Crunchbase and PitchBook, if you were looking at multi-data, all of that data is self-reported and gathered. It's actually not being collected. And so it's literally they're sending out a fleet of analysts collecting data. And we've seen data points in some of those things that aren't validated that are wrong. And so it's really, really important as you're looking at different data sets to compare them with user experience research you've done with your customers, and then just different data feeds to find that single point of truth that you know that is realistic.
Makes a lot of sense, Adrian. And I feel like a lot of people oftentimes use market research to just confirm what they already feel, which obviously, if you think you're building a great product and the market research says that, that's really helpful and you're in the right direction. But what happens when the inverse is true? When you do all of this market research and you discover something that you don't really like, and what if the market size is too small, or you find that, oh my God, there's a competitor doing exactly what I'm doing, but they've raised $100 million. What do you suggest founders and kind of early companies do in that case?
I'm happy to go. Part of it is when you're looking at things like competitors, you never want to be the only one out there. When I hear founders, and look, I've been a founder before, and you say we're in a market creating position, usually that means there is no market. Having 2 competitors means that there is a market. Having 3 to 4 competitors means that there's just not enough market share for all of you. And so it's really important to kind of find a place where you know there's enough validation by customers, there's enough validation by, more importantly, paying customers, and that there's enough market share in a space. Like we have been talking to a few founders in a space that shall remain nameless, where one of the CEOs, it was highly competitive a few years ago, and said the total addressable market was $5 million and there's 3 competitors in it. And I was like, yikes, that doesn't build a business. And so I think it's important when you look at that is to be able to have that validation and that product marketing fit. And really the important piece as you're sort of looking at these validation points is they're being connected to scale and the scale of customers you're buying. You know, the first 10 customers, the first 20, the first 100, the first 200, the market changes as you go up because you're now a different company. And I think when you look at something like you have a competitor, there is still enough to go around. But if they're attacking the same market that you're attacking, you know, there's either one, you unless you have a competitive advantage and a moat around you that says this is why we're differentiated. I think it's also good to be able to be like, am I competitor number 3? If I'm trailing and looking for, you know, the crumbs, is this, you know, have to ask yourself as a founder, is this enough to build an entire business around?
Yeah. It's interesting. There's a question from the audience that I think is a good segue. We should bring this up. Steve Jobs once said, don't build what customers are asking, because by the time you build that product, their needs would change. So this is a really interesting thing on market research, I guess, that some of it may be historical or a little bit backwards looking. I guess I'm curious to hear your thoughts of, especially that kind of dictating the future of your startup or the future of your product. How do you integrate and think through this quote?
I think it depends on the industry. So if you look at what the food and bev industry is getting as feedback from the market and from the influencers and the early adopters, they're asking for healthier foods. They're asking for less packaging. They're asking for fewer chemicals. And then they're asking for niches like, you know, keto and protein and plant-based and all this stuff. You can ignore it at your peril, but I am personally glad that, you know, what happened 10 and 15 and 20 years ago, which was a couple of chemicals, a lot of sugar and fat, was packaged up brightly and fed to kids, is now changing. So I do think you need to listen to the customers. That doesn't mean that what you're building is going to be what any one customer says. You need to marry that up with what you think the market is going to go to. So to quote somebody else who's a star, Wayne Gretzky says, skate to where the puck is going to go.
I think it's very simplified statement, if I dare to say. And the reason being, like, look, is everybody articulate in expressing what they want? No, that's not the case. If you ask people directly, are they gonna give you exactly the visionary product of the future? No, but I do think there is no replacement in understanding pain points, and people can communicate pain points very clearly. Now, they may not be able to envision the solution to those pain points, but they definitely can. I think to ignore things like price sensitivity when you're about to go on a market with a product. We recently had actually a startup, just to give you an example, that had a specific price point, and then they learned that 90% of consumers actually would not pay for it, and they thought it's overpriced, right? And giving that, they ended up changing it a bit. They had an idea about like what is important to communicate to customer that was like very scientifically based, but then they actually found out that most people didn't even understand what that package was about, and people were interested in, does the product work? How long does it take for it to work? How much does it cost? Right? And so these type of insights, I think, are really difficult to just hypothesize and not test. And so that's when market research is really critical. So there is way more than just asking customers what you want, I think, when it comes to market research. And that's where I would respectfully just like disagree a bit with the spirit of the statement.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Another trend that seems to be coming up in nearly every industry, but I'm sure applies a lot to the way that we even do market research, is kind of the proliferation of like advanced analytics, machine learning, some of the AI tooling that's out there. I'm curious, like, how does that apply to market research? Are we able to get more intelligent insights? And maybe, Naira, I know this is kind of your wheelhouse, so maybe you can kick us off here, and then would also love to pass the baton to Tina for this.
Yeah, sure. Great question. I think there is a ton of buzzwords and there's tons of confusion, even just about like the terms themselves. So maybe it just would help like the audience and like with just basic definitions, right? Like to just say that AI is a branch that leverages fundamentally computers and machine to do tasks that mimics human intelligence. Now, typically, machine learning is considered to be a branch of AI that focuses primarily on computer science, on statistics, statistical algorithms, and math to do these tasks. And then, of course, there is the automation piece. Now, they get used interchangeably, but I think it's important to separate between among them, because sometimes you can have automation but no machine learning, or you can have machine learning but actually there is no automation. But in regards to how it applies to market research, I think it's mostly on the software. And what we have seen in our industry and like what we do, it used to take statisticians, for example, to figure out what type of statistical analysis I need to conduct to be able to say, is A significant than B? Do I do chi-square? Do I do ANOVAs? Do I do t-tests? Do I do MANOVAs, MANCOVAs, you name it? And we've gotten to a point where technology actually is able to identify what type of variables we're talking about and what type of algorithms and statistical formulas I can run. And so that has been very direct application in technology in terms of how we've used machine learning to automate. And when you do that, I think like magic happens. Like that's when you're able to scale expertise. So it doesn't sit in the hands of you to be able to tell investor or your stakeholder that the color of your product drives revenue or whatever that might be the case. I think another application we see in machine learning AI has to do with natural language processing, and that is the ability to analyze text at scale. So if you have a ton of product reviews online, or if you're conducting a survey with 20 people and you would like to understand pretty quickly, not just like the sentiments, but the themes and the drivers, that's where NLP can add a lot of value. So it's been mostly on the software rather than the hardware in market research. Not to say that we cannot go into hardware, but mostly it's been concentrated on the software piece.
Thanks, Naira. Yeah. And Tina, you've worked with a few companies that I think have employed some kind of machine learning strategies against their market research. Is there an example you were thinking of in specific?
Yes. So when I first started, I was very much doing the duct tape that I know everybody who's a startup is doing, right? Like a lot of effort, a lot of thought, and a lot of just simple looking, a lot of qualitative. But once we got to our next stage, and for us, the stage was we were acquired back in March 2020, that came with an infusion of capital. And what I did is we partnered with metadata.io, and they place ads, and they do more than just A/B testing. It's really multivariate testing, which a lot of people are doing right now. And they start with what you think is your sweet spot of your target market, and they build that into their system. They then continue to experiment outside of that so that you get a bit of confirmation and results on what you thought was working. And it expands your thinking to let you know if there are other opportunities or if there are pieces of the market where you don't have the right message. And in this case, it's about the message, not the product, because it's about marketing. And that allows you to get to that level of data where you see how many people are using it. Is your sweet spot within one size of company, or is it actually applied to founders that have been funded, which is what we've realized, right? It doesn't have to have revenue. It does have to have a budget. So if it's VC funded, they're perfect targets for us, and a lot of larger companies. And then refining the target user and the target persona, and refining and expanding upon that, because the person that we're looking for is a director of sales with a product in brick and mortar stores. So I am not looking for, inside of the industry code of food and bev, anyone in restaurants or anyone who's a supplier, for example, of a raw ingredient or just chocolate chips. I'm looking for the packaged food branded company. So I can't really use the base case industry codes. I need to refine it even further. And that's where being able to say, this is what I think my sweet spot is, let the machine learning confirm that for me or not, expand in one direction or another. And of course, this goes in 360 degrees. And then I can put in a suppression list so that we're not wasting money going after leads that are not of value. There's no way that I could do that. There's no way I could do that with a huge team. And it is incredibly cost effective to give them a budget to hit and a way of refining how that works. And I get to test the image, the headline and the first bullet and the landing page. I find it incredibly useful. And that same concept is applicable in so many different ways.
Yeah, it's amazing to me how much advanced tooling and techniques there kind of exist when you really start going down this rabbit hole. I'm curious about, and Adrian, this is directed to you, whether there's like a sense of analysis paralysis that happens, right? You could essentially never get more market research, but at what point is enough, and do you need to just go and start your business?
I have known entrepreneurs that literally get into market, that sort of analysis paralysis. And they look at so much data and so many like decks, and they literally get stuck. And the reality is the entire goal of market data and market analysis is to help you make a decision. If you don't ever make a decision, it doesn't matter if it's right or if it's wrong. You're just never going to make a decision. And so the important piece is to, move with your feet. And, you'll hear this term, fail fast, and it's connected with the whole, lean startup method. The entire goal of that is to take customer feedback, market data, make a decision, do something, test it again, make a decision, do something. And that's the critical part about, what we're trying to get across here from all of us. Use it, make a decision, test again, use it, make a decision. Because I think the most important thing to know is you can do all the market research in them. You can talk to every customer. I'll tell you right now, in 1 month, it'll be completely different. In 3 months, it'll be completely different. And as the company moves, you have to, this is an ongoing thing. You need to be constantly talking to the customers. You need to be constantly talking to where they are, because even we've had startups ourselves. We have one that's in the B2C space, and the feedback of the customers, when they were pre-product, was completely different than when they had paying customers, which was completely different when these customers were engaged. And so now they're leveraging these breakout stars. There's a few people that they've seen, and these could be the super predictors. These could be the most engaged customer that they're able to talk to and engage with them to start getting real feedback, but that are indicators of what the overall sampling of customers will look like. But it's super important to, as you're growing, to constantly dipping your toe into the pool to check the water. Are we going on the right path? Are we moving in the right direction? Because that's the thing, like, this doesn't stop once. Like, this really is the thing that you have to do, because if not, and if you don't do it and you're not taking the temperature, you can quickly get sidelined by a trend or by something that you're not paying attention to because you've decided to, push in one direction and not look back.
I agree. I think market research is one of the incredible places where you should, test and learn, fail forward, fail fast. The important part is the forward part. Market research helps you aim, but at the end of the day, you're the one that has to make the decision. You're the one that has to pull the trigger. At the end of the day, it's ready, aim, fire. Market research helps you aim, but you need to make that decision.
Yeah. Makes a lot of sense. I'm curious though, to push you a little bit on this, have you ever run into a case where a startup or a company doesn't need to do market research?
If they have paying customers very quickly. Here's the nice thing, that like, when you look at the B2C world, what has changed very quickly with the advent of things on Kickstarter? Like, anyone who's launching a product, the first thing we talk to them is, have you launched a Kickstarter? Because that's going to quickly be able to, it's, the world has changed in 5 years, that now people are using Kickstarter and like all of these sort of, WeFunding platforms to start pre-ordering product and to start getting customer feedback. And that's different from, I would go build this and then try to sell it. And so I think that sort of with the advent of technology, there are areas that you're able to get product in front of them fast enough to be able to, and to get them pre-paying for product. And so I think that's a good spot to be in. But I still think, even with that, like, you may not have to do this massive $10,000 or $20,000 feedback, but I think you still have to do a little bit of user experience research and that customer one-on-one to validate that, like, are they happy? Because good customer success isn't about getting them to pay and repay. It's about the well-being of that customer, whether it's a B2C or an enterprise, that they're happy with you as a brand, because that's what's going to win you the next customer.
Great.
Yeah, I'll just maybe just reiterate what Adrian said. I mean, why wouldn't you, right? Like I do think actually the world is divided into like two camps. It's either like you're part of a cult, and you're promoting a cult, building a cult, or you're data driven and you're a learning organization. If you are a learning organization, and if that's a culture and that's a company that you're building, you always have something to figure out. Like, you always have something where you can gain better understanding. And so why, and given that we live in a digital world where it's no longer cost prohibitive, why wouldn't you collect the feedback from the entities that really will make or break your business, right? And even, just even giving some examples to bring it to life to people. We recently had a startup that was in Series C, and they wanted to test like 15 new features. They were thinking strategically about rolling out, and they learned that actually there were 3 top features that were really most important, and they didn't need to spend a lot of their resources and efforts in the 5 features that mattered less to their customers. Now, did you need to do research? I think that's like a question for every founder and like startup, and you can say, no, I didn't need it, but I would argue, like, why not do it? If anything, it will give you great information. Yeah.
Great. Thank you. It looks like we have a couple of questions from the audience, and I know we have just shy of 15 minutes left. So audience members, if you have any other questions, please add them here, and we'll kind of open it up to some of the questions that you guys have. So the first is from Tarishma. Thanks for your question. And my hunch is that this is directed towards Tina, but it's in the food industry. How do you enter new markets for unique flavors or products without giving out free samples?
So that is a challenge, right? Because one of the things that you want is, product in mouths. But there's different ways of doing it. You want to inspire trial, and you want people to buy it. So they might buy something where it is buy 2 of something and you get another one free. It might not be, a free sample, right? Like, they're paying for it because you upsold. That might be one strategy that you might have. 2, join a discovery box. You will find those users that want to have a completely new set of snacks show up in their home once a month for them to discover something new. If you can be in that, they've paid for it. You get paid, and you're still getting new trial. And finally, you can describe product, you can visually show product, and you can have amazing imagery or include it in a recipe and describe it in a mouth-watering way. And if you know that you've read a restaurant menu and clearly wanted the 3rd item, right? You know that it's very possible to get someone to buy something that maybe wasn't what they were thinking of, but they'll buy it and they'll try it. So it is possible. It is a lot more difficult, but there's no reason for you to be giving away free samples to people who don't necessarily fit your target demographic. Like, don't just randomly give out 100 samples to 100 people. Try to be in the right place.
Thanks, Tina. We also have a question from Sabarna here. Thanks for the question. And I'll ask the question, then I'll kind of open it up a little bit, so it might be applicable for a few more. But the question is, any suggestions on a good source of free secondary data which might help a mental health provider startup? And then maybe more broadly, like, where do you turn to even get some of this kind of secondary data or like external market validation? Are there good go-to sources that are kind of in your repertoire?
So since I've done duct tape market research for so long, and I have a high respect for market research, having come out of Procter & Gamble and Gillette, which really rely heavily on that, I recommended to Beauty, I don't even remember what they were called originally, but they rebranded to Grapevine. The packaging industry does a lot of research on how much packaging the beauty industry uses and other industries. So we used their once a quarter report, the one on beauty, and that gave them, so from a big company like Unilever, let them know how much was beauty care, because Unilever is beauty care plus packaging, plus food, plus other things. So you can look at the suppliers to the industry that you're going to go into and realize that because they know so much through packaging, for example, or through something else that is usage, they might be trying to establish themselves as a thought leader, and that is useful information. And before Adrian says, but you have to validate it, let me say, and you should validate it.
Awesome.
And for the healthcare, I'm sorry, I don't have any input on that. But
for the health,
we'll have it.
For the healthcare, again, I'm not sure specifically what you're interested in mental health, but NIH actually has a ton of data they share on their website. You can download Excel sheets even, and the National Alliance on Mental Health and Illness also has a lot of data. And so these are the two things in the mental health that I would recommend starting with. And typically you will see references to other data sources. And so hopefully that would be helpful.
Thank you.
Yeah.
We have an interesting question here from Vijay. Thanks for the question, Vijay. How do you best leverage anecdotal data and the lived experience of one or just a few people? And maybe tying this back to what we talked about close to the beginning, just like ignoring some of the outliers that Adrian was mentioning. Curious to get your kind of general thoughts here.
I can jump in on this one. One of the things that we've done successfully in the past is use what's referred to as a cafeteria study. And so one-on-ones are good. So what we would do, and just to sort of jump in, a cafeteria study is getting a small group of users very unofficially, not in a focus group, not behind glass. Literally, it's like buying 6 to 8 people pizza and then asking them 3 questions, and at each question having them sorted by importance, which is what's referred to as a card sort. What is the most important? What is the middle? What is the least of the 3 things they want to tell you? And so one of the things that happens amazingly is when you get a small group of people and you go around the table and you start sharing what they've done, magically anecdotes come out. People love to talk and to give you their opinions, especially Americans. They love telling you their opinions. And so, but as they're talking with each other, they start sorting their questions. Oh, you know what? That's not most important to me. You're right. I'm thinking about this. This is more important to you. And what you do is, after you've gotten these little note cards back, the first one is worth 3 points, the second one, 2 points, and the third one is, 1 point. And you start quantifying this to just build some quiz, so the goal is to quantify these anecdotes. And also at the same time, it's really helpful to find people that have really good anecdotes or are really active that you can kind of pluck out of these surveys. And you want to do at the beginning 4 to 5 of these, just to put them in front of them, just to get enough, a little bit of, it's not going to be true statistical significance, but it's enough to pull them out. And then with the people you've plucked out of each group, then you can do a deeper dive on one-on-ones and dig into those anecdotes. But you want to start with a global pool first, because if you start with one-on-one, that could lead you down, a rat hole of chasing after a feature or function that, happens to be one person's opinion, but not the opinion of the market or a group of itself.
Thanks, Adrian. Naira,
I
Tina,
agree. And the other way to leverage it, once you have a good collection of the right anecdotes and the right stuff, it helps you humanize the data. And while we are all, and everyone in the audience, I'm sure, is very data forward and analytical and knows their way around Excel, not everyone in your organization is. So if you can have those anecdotes and humanize the data, it will help get that information into something actionable for so many more people. You need to understand the data, but the anecdotes might make it easier for that to come across equality.
Yeah, and I'll add and say I am personally a huge fan of combining quantitative and qualitative. I think quantitative data gives you more of the scope, and qualitative gives you more on the depth. I think there is nothing bad with anecdotes. It's more about the quality of the data. Sometimes you can get massive value out of interviewing an N of one if the quality of the data is really, really deep and robust. And quite frankly, sometimes even if you collect 1,000 responses and it has nothing to do with the audience you want to engage, that could be invalid as well. So there is nothing wrong about anecdotal data. It's more about how you leverage it and the quality of those anecdotals.
Wonderful. All right, we only have a couple minutes left here, so I figured maybe we could conclude with a short piece of wisdom or a best practice or just a funny story related to market research that each of you could share before we wrap up here. Whoever wants to take it away, feel free to go for it.
I'll jump in one, and it has to do with an Apple story. A long time ago at HBS, I was able to interview Larry Tesler, and Larry Tesler was the head of the Apple Newton division and was the guy who introduced Steve Jobs to the IBM Lisa. Well, when they were testing the Apple Newton, the team was so focused on this being a consumer product that they started putting plants in focus groups to make sure that they were getting the right results. And so Tesla hired a market research person. And what she did is she took the Apple Newton and rode around fire trucks, rode around with police force and said, this is a product for the vertical markets. And literally was on top of a fire engine with this product and saying, would you use it? And they're like, yes, we can actually use this PDA for enterprise. And so, of course, we all know that the product in the hands of consumers didn't do very well. Roll the clock 10 years later, at the Moscone Center, at Macworld, they're introducing the iPhone. What is the product that is being used to check in consumers and scan their badges? It's an Apple Newton. And so one of the things that it shows you is that even with, that the data is there to help you. The data is there actually to make a decision. And you do have to be careful that as much as you want to create a market creating position, sometimes the market will tell you what it wants. And that's okay.
Thanks, Adrian.
Sure. I mean, I'll maybe finish off and say, we started the session by talking about quotes, and we all forgot about quotes. But one of my favorite quotes in entrepreneurship is by Reid Hoffman, who once said that an entrepreneur is someone who jumps off a cliff and figures out how to build a plane on the way down. And it resonates with me as a co-founder of a tech company. But in the context of this session, I would say have data and insight be your friend and your enemy to figure out how do you assemble the amazing airplane you're building on the way down. Don't be scared of it, utilize it, and have it be your friend.
So build the Excel spreadsheet before you do
basically.
Awesome.
And
Yeah.
I'll say, recognize that everyone who's doing the analytics will come at it with their own perspective and their own background. Back in P&G, the intern came up with the styling category of hair care was growing. The brand manager was like, shh, no, it's not. Hairspray and mousse is declining, but all of the pomades and the gels and the extra stuff was growing. And as we now know, we all use serums and creams and everything else that exists in hair care that is not an old school hairspray. So listen to everybody. You can learn from anyone.
Awesome. Thank you, first of all, to our panelists for such an amazing and informative session. Please join me in giving them a virtual round of applause. We hope that the audience now is well armed and equipped to go do some of the market research of their own. Thank you for joining us today, and please enjoy the rest of Startup Boston.
Thank you for having us.
Thank you. It was a pleasure.
Bye.
Thank you, Zan, for moderating.
Thank you, guys.
Zan.
Thank you, Hassan.
Bye, everyone.